Hello and welcome to another episode of Denusion, the Daniel Griffith podcast, where we nurture quite often untamed and undomesticated conversations surrounding the ideological illusions of Mother Culture in a humble and very hopeful attempt to co-create a more beautiful world. I have with me today Gabe Brown, best-selling author of the book Dirt to Soil, a regenerative rancher in his own right, and founding partner of Understanding Ag and the Soil Health Academy. Gabe, I feel ridiculous even introducing you pre to this, as we discussed in the pre-podcast little time. I wanted to do some research on some recent podcasts that you recorded, just so that I don't force you to have the same conversation twice. And I was so immediately overwhelmed. I was just scrolling. I just typed in Gabe Brown into Apple Podcasts, and I just scrolled and scrolled and scrolled and scrolled. And so you are definitely not a new name to most of our listeners, but regardless of that, just thank you for being with us. It's a pleasure.
Wow, thank you, Daniel. It's really good to be with you today.
Absolutely. There's so many places to start with somebody like you. And I don't know if this is a perfect place, but I'll start here anyways. Regeneration as a term, both in agriculture and in the consumer's mind, is growing exponentially. And I see this as a very good thing. With its rise, we do run into some problems with understanding what it is. And so maybe let's start there as one of the original, well, maybe an original is a bad word, but one of the premier kickstarters of the modern regenerative movement, someone who was in conventional agriculture and transitioned about as many years ago as I am old. I want to ask you, what is regeneration? What is regenerative agriculture? And maybe why is it that to you?
Wow, that's a great question. And I think it's difficult for many to hone in on a single definition. But one that I like, that we use, is regenerative agriculture is farming and ranching in synchrony with nature to repair, rebuild, revitalize, and restore ecosystem function, beginning with all life in the soil, moving to all life above the soil. And I really think that sums it up nicely. You know, one of the things we're seeing happen as regen has caught on and realize I've been in this a long, long time, and we didn't even call it regen way back. First, it was, it was about healthy soil, and it was soil quality. And finally, it evolved into the words regenerative agriculture. And I really like that because regenerate means to renew. And we are bringing life back into our ecosystems. And it's not just the soil, though, it's our entire ecosystems. And so I like to take a more holistic approach that it's everything. It's all encompassing, from the smallest soil microbiology on up to us as human beings and our interaction with nature. And I think it's important that we keep that holistic approach in mind.
Yeah, absolutely. Repair, revitalize, and restore. Three words in that definition. But when you were reading it, I think this idea of bringing life back to nature, right? It has to begin in humility and this assumption that we have taken life out of nature.
Mm-hmm.
And that's that re portion. What does that really mean, though? So, like, your
Yeah.
background is in conventional agriculture, conventional row cropping, if I understand it. You experienced some sort of pain, and I'm being vague there because I want you to talk about that. And then you transitioned, and so your
Mm-hmm.
transition to bringing life back to nature had a story. Do you mind just
Mm-hmm.
really briefly, a couple minutes, tell that story?
Sure. I'll try and keep it brief.
Yeah.
So my wife and I now own our ranch right outside Bismarck, North Dakota, which was first purchased by her parents back in 1956. And they farmed it very conventionally, heavy tillage, half summer fallow, half crop, small grains, set stock, season long grazing on pastures with a cow herd. they farmed it that way for 35 years, using some inputs, some synthetic fertilizers, herbicides, a little bit of fungicides, little pesticides. But when my wife and I purchased part of the operation from them, it didn't take me long to see that I couldn't summer follow half. I needed to make land payments. I needed to garner a profit on every acre. And so I had read a lot about no-till, sold all my tillage equipment, bought a no-till drill. Then I was committed, and that was back in 1994. 1995 came along, and I tell how the day before I was going to start combining 1,200 acres of spring wheat, we lost 100% of our crop to hail without any insurance. And the father-in-law had farmed here 35 years, only had hail twice to a small extent. So we just didn't think insurance was a good buy. Well, I found out otherwise. 1996 came along. We lost 100% of our crop to hail again. My wife and I took off-farm jobs. We had to support a family, had to make payments. Well, I started to experiment with different things, different crops, because when that second hailstorm occurred, again, the crop was mature, but I'd already combined some of the earlier crops. So I started to diversify the rotation. 1997 came along and we dried out. Nobody in the area combined an acre. There was no crop to be had. And so things were really tough then. And I tell people that's when I went and I heard a rancher from Canada speak, Don Campbell, and he made this statement. He said, if you want to make small changes, change the way you do things. But if you want to make major changes, change the way you see things. And for whatever reason, that just stuck in my mind. And I remember driving home and realizing if I was going to stay actively farming and ranching, it was up to me. Well, even though it was very dry that year, I was able to seed some fall biennials, some cereal rye, winter triticale, hairy vetch, and I noticed a real change in our soils. Where other people's winter wheat didn't germinate, mine did, because I was changing the soil structure. We were starting to see earthworms in the soil. We were starting to see more life return to our ranch. Anyway, to make a long story longer, 1998 came along and we lost 80% of our crop to hail, but that hailstorm occurred in June. Too late to get another cash crop seeded, but I did seed some warm season annuals for forage. And then the truth is, I did not have enough money to bale that forage up. So I just turned the cattle in the winter and started winter grazing it. Well, lo and behold, they did well. They did fantastic. So that was my first foray, so to speak, into winter grazing. And I tell people, I'm a pretty slow learner. I got to learn things the hard way. Well, the good Lord had to slap me 4 times before I really woke up and saw, hey, there's a different way of doing this. Because think of what happened during those years. The hailstorm, of course, laid down a tremendous amount of biomass on the soil surface. Well, that's one of the 6 principles of soil health, armor on the soil. So then I was starting to diversify the crop rotation, planting these fall cereals, planting some forage crops. So I was adding another principle, diversity. I was already no-tilling. So I had that principle down. Then living root as long as possible throughout the year. Well, I was planting these fall seeded biennials, capturing more solar energy. I wasn't near smart enough to understand what was going on. And at that time, there was nobody else talking about that. There was some people talking about no-till. But they weren't talking about what's come to known today as the 6 principles of soil health. And then the final principle, animal and insect integration. Well, me grazing these annuals that I seeded onto cropland, I was integrating the livestock. And what I really saw through those 4 years and shortly after was the resiliency of a natural ecosystem. Nature is always self-organizing, self-regulating, self-healing. Well, nature was healing itself because I wasn't screwing it up. I didn't have the money to screw it up. So nature was starting to repair, rebuild, and revitalize those soils for me. And, I tell people I've just been truly blessed since then, because it sent me on this 30 plus year journey of learning, of education, of understanding how ecosystems function, and understanding that my role is to work with nature, not against her. And in so doing, we've become very profitable, and we now have a resilient ranch.
Wow. Do you think is a lot of conversation that I'm involved with all about this idea of transition, either from a modern eater's perspective and just trying to transition to a better food system, to transition to a better diet, etc. Do you think it's possible, or do you think you would have transitioned as you transitioned without the hail, like without the pain?
Yeah.
Like, do you think pain is really required?
Well, that's a very good question, Daniel. And so often, the mother of invention is pain and suffering, because
Right.
I didn't have a choice. You know,
Right.
I tell the story. My neighbors were just licking their chops. When's the dumb city kid gonna fail and we can buy his land? Well,
Right.
I'm pretty stubborn. That was never an option in my book, you know. So I would have made the transition to no-till, because I was thinking, I'd switched to no-till before then. But make no mistake about it, the 4 years of natural disasters accelerated my transition. However, it's important for me to say there's people starting, farmers, ranchers starting down the regenerative path now. They've done more in 5 years than I did in 20 years, because they have the benefit of seeing, everyone that went before them. And I'll gladly share my story to help others, because boy, what I wouldn't have done for some kind of help back then. I was very fortunate in that our local district conservationist, Jay Fear, with NRCS, he took an interest in what I was doing, and he saw the changes on the land, and he will tell you that revitalized his career. And we became avid learners together, pushing each other. And, they asked me to serve on the County Soil Conservation District Board of Directors, and that propelled things to another level. But it's a learning process. And the thing that perhaps it showed me the most, Daniel, was that we need to be lifelong learners. Okay? Too often in agriculture and in life in general, people get stuck in their ways. They're comfortable, and they don't want to step outside the box. You know, Let me give you an example of that. So I was speaking in Northeast Colorado, and I had a young man come up to me after my presentation. He said, "Gabe, how do I get my father and grandfather to diversify?" And I said, "Well, what's your rotation now?" And he said, "Well, Granddad bought the farm in 1926, and we've never sown a crop other than winter wheat." And I'm thinking, man, that's 80, 90 years. Think of that.
Right.
And, to me, I said, "Well, you can't be making a living at that." "Oh, no," he said, "we all have off farm jobs. It's just a hobby." Well, but he said, "I want to make it my livelihood." I said, "Well, the good news is you can't, you know, but we have to be lifelong learners." You know, Henry Ford said it best when he said, "Whether you think you can or you think you cannot, you're correct." And you have to have that can-do attitude, and you have to want to learn. I have several college degrees. Never once during all my studies did they talk about the 6 principles of soil health. We hadn't come up with the 3 rules of adaptive stewardship. Now, Alan Savory had talked about the 4 ecosystem processes, but they weren't teaching us that in school. Our high schools aren't teaching it, our colleges aren't teaching it, extension isn't teaching it. So you have to want to learn if you're a farmer or rancher. The good news is today, as you said at the top of this podcast, you know, now you have the internet, and there's all kinds of learning opportunities out there.
Yeah. Yeah, for sure. And just blessed that when you want to find 150 different podcasts of Gabe Brown, it's all at your fingertips.
Yes, that'd
Let's
be a nightmare.
yeah, yeah, it was overwhelming. Um, your work is prolific, and that's a very, very good thing. Let's stay here for a minute though on how we think. Um, in the marketplace. So let's switch over to the consumer's mentality. In the marketplace, we are being pitched a very strange story, which is that mammals, herbivores, even humans that have worked on this globe for a long time now doesn't make a lot of sense, and we need to be manufacturing meat and plants and changing that. And I don't really want to get into the nutrition side because there's just no fun there. It makes no sense. It's just us yelling at some third person that's not here. But maybe I want to get to this. So in your definition of regeneration, you have repair, revitalize, restore, and it was obviously much longer than that. But even the term regeneration, you said it beautifully, bringing life back to nature. And then you also included in the definition of your understanding of regeneration this idea of holistic thought, meaning that we can't just regenerate the soil. We have to look at the communities, or I would say the souls of the communities, or the souls of the rest of that inner work actually matters too. What does regenerative agriculture look like? A truly regenerative agriculture, true life returning back to nature in the modern world?
That's a great question. And I think we learned several lessons during the recent COVID pandemic. We learned how fragile the current food system is. We learned that it's important to know your farmer or rancher. And people tell me, but Gabe, I live in New York City. I can't know my local farmer. And I call BS on that. You can't, because I know many people who are selling into New York City. Yeah, they might be 20 miles away simply because of the size of the city, but they're as local as you can get. I also know of many people who live in New York City who are producing their own food on a rooftop in a small garden, and you can do a lot of that. You can produce much, much more than you think possible. And there is no better feeling in the world than biting into a tomato that you grew yourself, and it's a real tomato, not one of these fake orangish yellowish things, right? You know? And I think we have to understand that, society has evolved, whether right or wrong, to this point in time where there was mass exodus from rural America into cities, but I think you're starting to see it move back out. Here I am in Bismarck, North Dakota. And when COVID, we were always in a growing boom here, a lot of it because of the energy industry. But when COVID hit, it was unbelievable what happened to the housing market in my local community, because people were leaving Minneapolis and Chicago in droves to get to a smaller community, one that still offered the amenities they wanted, but it's also one where you can buy local food. And I think we're going to see a continued movement from large scale production models to ones that are more local. And this is where the opportunity, I get contacted on a daily basis from young people who want to get into agriculture. And I tell all of them, there is more opportunity now than there has ever been. And they say, but the land cost is so high. You don't have to own the land, okay? There's plenty of land available at a reasonable price. You just have to understand how to establish your niche, so to speak, and then grow as your business and your profits grow. So I think we can move to a much more localized system. I was in the supermarket here just a few weeks ago, and here I am, Bismarck, North Dakota. Well, the geographical center of North America is less than 100 miles from my ranch, okay? So that'll tell you where I'm at. And they were selling peppers from Denmark. Now, you tell me how that makes any sense at all. Think of the fossil fuels that were used to get that pepper from Denmark to Bismarck, North Dakota. And then think of what about the quality? Is the quality there, the freshness, the phytonutrients that we need? That's another whole story.
Do, do you think that if that pepper in Denmark was grown regeneratively, that it is a good thing for it to be in the Bismarck, North Dakota grocery store, or not a good thing? When I say good, I realize that's nebulous. Regenerative thing. Is it a regenerative thing? Is it not? Do you have an opinion on that?
First of all, it's regenerative from the standpoint it was grown in healthy soils.
Right.
But we cannot consider it regenerative when it uses that much fossil fuel to get where it ends up. That just, I know plenty of people around the Bismarck area who have grown plenty of peppers. Maybe that means we need to eat a little more seasonally, but what's wrong with that?
Right.
What's wrong with that?
Right.
I mean, it's kind of like right now, here we are recording this in February in North Dakota. You try and find a decent grape at the store, they're not real grapes, okay? They're just disgusting. And the reason is it's lack of freshness, lack of, growing close to home.
Right.
It's just the wrong season. We got to eat more seasonally. Everybody put a pot roast in the oven. Pot roast, potatoes, and carrots still abound in February in North Dakota.
Even here in Virginia. I mean, I grew up in Northeast Ohio, right in the snow belt, right under Lake Erie. And so, negative 20 degrees and a bunch of snow was was seasonal for us. And obviously where you're at is a different world. I listened to one of your presentations on YouTube years ago. And one of the things you were making a joke about winter, how like cats usually get on the car hoods.
Hood of the vehicle.
And you had a picture of a cow on the top of a top of a car, just joking about it. And and Ohio is very different than that. But even in Virginia, like to get fruit in the middle of February, it's atrocious. Like our kids, we have 3 kids. They're 5 and under. All of them were born on the farm, and we call them our forest gremlins because they were born and they never looked back, and that they just farm full time with us, and it is what it is. But their palates are really refined. Like our 2-year-old likes homemade horseradish and sauerkraut more than she likes, cheesy doodles, or I don't know what kids eat today. Like you could put her, then she just doesn't know them, right? Like, and as long as she doesn't know a cheesy doodle, she loves the bite of a horseradish. And I'm getting off my point. But we bought some blueberries recently from the store, and our kids couldn't eat them.
Yep.
We put them in front, and our 5-year-old said, "Dad, they're nasty." And the 3-year-old son is like, "They're so weak and juicy." And like, they immediately recognize there's a truly unhealthy aspect to transporting food that distance.
Absolutely. And that gets into the fact that I honestly believe the vast majority of people, upwards 95+%, have not tasted truly nutrient dense food. Your children have, and they recognize that. But, I travel more than a little bit. Okay. And 280 plus days on the road each year. And people ask how I do it. Well, the secret is I carry my own food with me, because otherwise I'd never do it. There's no way I could eat that. I sit in airport after airport and I look at I just can't do it. I bring my own food with me, because once your body tastes it, your body knows, and that gets to a whole nother topic of, we have to get back to the point where we're truly using food as medicine, preventative medicine, which is what it is. Food should be our preventative medicine. And I think this holistic approach takes all that into account. We're using food as preventative medicine.
Yeah. What I'm happy for you to defer this question, but when it comes down to producing food in a regenerative fashion that relies on inputs from another operation, what do you think the relationship between those two operations and the term regenerative is? Like, does that make Does the question make
It
sense?
does, and I'm certainly not going to pass on that question because I think you bring up a very important point, is that to truly be regenerative, we need to rely on you know, what I call natural capital. In other words, the energy flow, the natural nutrient cycle, the water cycle. You know, we've gotten away from that where agriculture today is often, the soil is simply used as a medium to hold a plant upright.
Right.
We don't look at what is the energy cycle, the water cycle, the nutrient cycle. We have to look at these things. So if you have two farms, ranches in close proximity, and they're helping each other move down that regenerative path, that's one thing, okay? Where at least they're moving in the right direction. I don't want to say no, they're not regenerative. But if you are exporting, your products thousands of miles away, I don't know how that could possibly, be regenerative, you
Yeah.
know? Yeah. And
It,
and full disclosure here, at this point in time, we're not selling all of our pastured proteins locally. We just haven't developed a big enough market yet. So we are shipping some of those. But make no mistake about it, it's our goal that we sell everything locally.
yeah.
And we'll get there. We'll get there.
Give me a second.
No problem. That's happened to me way more than once, Daniel. Way
You got
more
me.
than
You
once.
got me so excited. I wanted to ask another question. I just totally
It
choked.
happens.
I keep trying to begin it. I know it's just going totally down the wrong pipe.
Yeah.
Oh, it seems necessary though in your definition. Excuse me. Your definition. There's a progress that regeneration needs to encapsulate. This idea of progress, of getting better.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And you, right there, you gave me the perfect softball of why my partners and I at Understanding Ag started the verification company called Regenified. So we had no desire. I'm one that I think that the best verification one can have is an open door policy with their customers. And, we have an open door policy on our ranch. Anybody can walk on it at any time and look at anything. And that's our best sales pitch. And it really builds trust with our customers because they know we have nothing to hide. Okay. So, in saying that, what we were seeing is a greenwashing, so to speak. We have a lot of companies that are making these claims, we're going to source from regenerative we're going to source regeneratively grown products from 1 million acres, 5 million acres, whatever the case may be. Well, then, is it really regenerative? Let me give you this example. I spend the majority of my time now on Zoom meetings with board of directors and heads of sustainability from large companies. And I had a large company that contacted me and they wanted Understanding Ag's help sourcing regeneratively grown soybeans to use as biofuel. And I said, sure, we can do that. So I laid out a program where we'd educate the producers, we'd help guide them down the regenerative path, presented that to that head of sustainability, and they said, well, no. All we want to know is if they're no-till, they're regenerative. And I said, no, they're not. That's not regenerative in any way. It's one small step. Well, we're not spending that much money. And I said, well, then you truly don't want to source regenerative products. So we formed the company Regenified, and Regenified's mission is to move regeneration throughout the supply chain. What makes Regenified a bit unique is it's entirely inclusive. Doesn't matter if you're conventional, regenerative, organic, does not matter. Everybody can apply. And then baseline tests are done, and it's a series of soil tests, observations, measurements, probably one of the most comprehensive suite of tests in the business. Then a year later, and you have to have a plan. You have to have a plan to adopt the 6 principles, the 3 rules, to drive the 4 ecosystem processes. And this is where it really gets a bit unique as compared to some of the other verifications out there. It moves that producer along. And that producer is only compared to him or herself. So in other words, we're not comparing their farm to one that may or may not exist. It's, did they move in the right direction? Did they start adopting the 6 principles? Do we see more soil aggregation? Is the water infiltration improving? Do they have more armor on the soil? Are they increasing biodiversity? These whole metrics are measured, and then they have, that moves them, if they are, then they qualify for a higher tier. Then they can start claiming that they're regenerative and moving down this path. But they have to continue moving down this path. So this gets to the question about, okay, are they just exporting too much nutrients off their place? Or are they using things like wind energy and solar and biodiesels grown on their farm? How are they doing? Because the whole goal is to narrow it and move everybody together. And my partners and I put in the funding to start Regenified, but it's a standalone company. Salar Shimirani is our CEO. Doug Peterson, who many are familiar with. Doug had an extensive career with NRCS as a soil health specialist. He's the scientific officer for Regenified, and Doug has done a tremendous job putting these protocols together. In fact, it was so good that Whole Foods approved them without any changes. And the first Regenified products will be in Whole Foods market here very shortly. But that's the goal. How do we get everybody moving together and advancing according to their context, And realize, Daniel, your context in Virginia is much, much different than mine here in North Dakota. Right. It does no good to compare my operation to yours because it's totally different environment. And that's one of the beautiful things about Regenified. Let's move everybody together and on the same page. And I am in no way downplaying any of these other standards and verification processes. I say, hey, we need them all. Let's all move together. That's what this is about. How do we make the world a better place?
Absolutely. Absolutely. And you can answer this as Gabe Brown or Regenified, and that's up to you. Do you think there's a cap, an upper bound to a farm's size when it comes down to the idea of regeneration? Or have you experienced that? Let me ask the question very directly. Can you regenerate 1 million acres?
Well, Understanding Ag is currently consulting on over 33 million acres. Okay. Our largest client is over 2 million acres, and they are moving forward. So the answer is yes, but it has to be in that specific context. Okay. And I think you can regenerate any landscape. But I myself, I go back to Masanabu's quote where he says, the health of the land is directly related to the number of footsteps on that land. If you're really going to, as my partner Shane New says, become intentional, you have to set foot on the land. Not to throw anybody under the bus, but I have a neighbor who farms over 40,000 cropland acres. I have never, ever, they've been farming as long as I have here since 1983. I have never, ever, not once seen them stick a shovel in the soil. They may think they're regenerating landscape, but boy, you really got to want to when you get into larger landscapes. It can be done, but It's going to occur faster on smaller landscapes.
It's interesting. Do you think speed matters?
Realize, that question is a bit loaded question because in nature's eye, 100 years is a blink of an eye. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
We as human beings want the future, we want it yesterday. Okay. I often get asked because I'm getting long of the tooth and short of hair, am I pleased with the progression of regenerative ag? And I'm ecstatic of especially what's happened the last 3 years. 15 years ago, I mean, it was like beating your head against a wall. Well, now you can't hardly pick up a farm magazine. When I see John Deere's magazine, The Furrow, where the majority of articles talk about regenerative ag, we're making progress, And now when I read that they quit producing the plow, I thought we're really making progress, right? So it can't occur fast enough for my liking, but realize that, the first 15 years were really slow. The next 10 it went faster, and now it's really moving along at a pretty good clip.
Yeah, that was going to be one question I didn't want to ask you. I wanted to ask you on this conversation. People like I know Alan Savory is much older than you, but Alan Savory, Gabe Brown, all of these people, you're not aging out. I don't want to say that, but there's definitely new generation.
Yeah, we are. It's okay, Daniel. We are.
Well, you're still active. You're still traveling 280 days out of the year. I wanted your opinion though, because there's so many new faces, there's so many new voices, and I see this grand diversity as a very great thing. But I don't know. Looking back between the 1980s and today, I wanted your view on it.
Yeah, and my view is great. There's nothing I enjoy better than sitting back and listen and watching a young person who is 3 to 5 years into this journey, and they're all excited and seeing major changes, and they want to share that with somebody. Great, have at it. I'll gladly step aside. Gladly. I think it's fantastic. One of the most gratifying things I see about, and if you call it a movement, this regenerative movement, is the willingness to help other people. I mentioned how when I started, I had nobody to call, and there was not the internet or anything way back then. So now today, I can literally take my cell phone and call anywhere in the world and talk to people about regenerative ag, and they're willing to reciprocate and share. And this doesn't have to be a competition. This should be a community, one that's alive and caring for each other and sharing information. And that gets back to why my partners and I started understanding ag. It was all about education. And we simply saw the difference using the principles and rules to drive the processes, what a difference that made in our lives, in our families' lives, and to the ecosystem. And we want to share that. We want to spread the education.
What was your biggest surprise in building and running Understanding Ag? Ecologically, socially, I don't know.
Yeah, the biggest surprise, hands down. We have not been running we haven't hit our fifth year anniversary yet, and over 33 million acres actively consulting on. Realize we get requests from all over the world. That 33 million acres is almost entirely in the United States. We're doing a little bit in England and Ireland now, but I just can't believe the hunger and the thirst for this knowledge. It's overwhelming. And our biggest challenge, quite frankly, is finding experienced consultants. That by far is our biggest challenge. The work, we've got plenty of work. So, but it's exciting. I'm glad that there's the hunger and the knowledge. And, I just spoke to a college group in Minnesota, and I told those young people, I said, man, if there was ever anything to get into this regenerative agriculture, it's just ripe. There's so many opportunities in it right now. Yeah.
Yeah, it's almost like this is where humanity as a species is supposed to be
Well,
ecologically and with the turn of the world.
exactly, Daniel. And one phrase that we've trademarked at Understanding Ag is common ground for common good. I mentioned how I spend most of my time now talking to boards of directors, heads of sustainability. I might be talking to communities, heads of a community. And what I've found is I have to find, okay, where do we have common ground?
Mm.
So if I'm talking to a community that has an issue with their drinking water, okay, there's my common ground. I'm going to approach it from what do they wish to see? Well, they want clean drinking water. Okay, what do we in agriculture, regenerative ag, have to offer them? Well, that's easy. We can hold the nutrients on the landscape. We can take advantage of the natural nutrient cycle. They will have cleaner drinking water. If I'm talking to a group, maybe it's in a town, a rural community that is impoverished. Well, what can Regen Ag offer? We're seeing a marked increase in the demand for these heirloom grains. Let's start up that old elevator on Main Street and get it to handle regeneratively verified grains. I know of a small town in Minnesota that it's unbelievable. Every day there's rail cars in and out of that small town now because they're growing such a product. So we find common ground there. You know, if I'm talking to consumers, then that's an easy one. We talk human health and the work that we're doing showing that food that's grown in and on healthy soils is higher in these phytonutrient compounds. That's all about human health, and everybody, you know, that resonates with them. So you have to find common ground for common good. My belief is that as a society, we can agree on 85+% of the things. Why don't we focus on them? Don't worry about those 15%. I've testified in front of Congress and talk about a lesson in futility. Both sides of the aisle want the same thing, but they're too bullheaded to realize they just got to work on the common ground of that. We got to find common ground for common good. And I think the time is ripe for that. And we can do that. And
Yeah.
regenerative agriculture can play a huge role in that, and
Yeah.
I don't like I don't know, I don't call it climate change. I think the climate's always changing. I think we're seeing the results of decades of poor practices, both in agriculture and other industries, and that's negatively affecting the climate. But I think regenerative agriculture can play a major role in taking that carbon back out of the atmosphere and putting it back into the soil cycle where it belongs.
Yeah. Yeah. There's a lot of conversations, and I'm sure you're around all of these and probably equally as annoyed with them. But, can regenerative agriculture actually feed the world, or do we need an industrial, monolithic type approach?
Can
And
can I answer that briefly?
yeah, I'm done. Go ahead.
Okay.
Yeah, that's perfect.
So can regen ag feed the world? Well, let me use my own ranch as a scenario there. Okay, so I grow a wheat crop. My neighbor grows a wheat crop. Okay. Maybe the neighbor yields a little more than me. Now, in saying that, my proven yields are about 20% higher than average in the county. But say he yields more than me. Okay. But then after I grow that wheat crop, I grow a cover crop. And then I graze my grass finished beef on there. I graze my grass finished lamb on there. My bees are harvesting nectar, so they're producing honey off there. Then my laying hens follow the beef and the sheep, so I'm getting eggs off there. Then maybe I run my broilers across there, so we're producing broiler chickens. Now you tell me who's going to feed the world first. I just produced way, way more calories of nutrient-dense food than did my neighbor, okay? Which is going to provide more jobs, which is going to stimulate the economy, which is going to give cleaner water, cleaner air, which is going to sequester more carbon, okay? Now, if you want to have this argument with me, you better be ready.
Yeah. Yeah,
You
not
know,
not not me.
I know
You're
you
totally
don't,
right.
but I'm just saying, people who want to make that statement, they need to pull their head out of the sand because it's just a total mute point. It's not even close.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah.
I was I was doing some consulting in Kentucky with this organization that aggregates a bunch of chicken houses, for lack of
Mhm.
a better term, and I was talking to the individual who was kind of the boots on the ground, and he said, and showed up, his heat index was like 112 degrees in Kentucky that day, and we were all just sweating. And first thing he tells me, even before we got to the shade, moved off to the shade, was, I don't believe regenerative agriculture can feed the world. Just know that. I'm on board. I'm going to show you around, but I don't think it can feed the world. And I said, well, why? Why do you think this? And he said, if everybody in the state of Kentucky were to eat one egg today, our organization couldn't produce 1% of those eggs. And they're a particularly large organization. And then I was with another fellow on our team who's much more quick thinking than I am. And he goes, well, what if everyone in the state of Kentucky had 2 chickens in their backyard? You wouldn't even need to exist.
Exactly.
And his
Exactly.
face just dropped. I mean, he had no
Yep.
response for it. And
Yep.
highly productive land and two, as you're describing, and 2 chickens in the backyard. Those are two different approaches to, cracking the
But
same proverbial egg.
they're really not when you think holistic.
Mm,
They're really not two different approaches. You know, you look at the amount of produce that can be grown in a regenerative garden. I mean, our
yeah,
garden here on our ranch is maybe, 100 feet by 100 feet, and we feed 5 immediate families plus sell copious amounts of produce. I mean, most people's backyards are smaller than that,
yeah,
so it's really not as far-fetched as one might think.
yeah, yeah. Especially when we see life as local,
Hmm.
that we talked about earlier. Especially, if you need to produce a certain amount in the breadbasket of the United States and ship it all over the world, then yeah, we need to be
Hmm.
producing a lot, which is
But
debatable.
but we should talk about that. Is it our responsibility to feed the world?
Mm.
Isn't it
What
their
do you think?
responsibility to feed themselves? Well, I think we do more harm feeding the world than as if they would feed themselves.
Mm.
Look at the health crisis that's going on all over the world. And you wonder how much of that is because we're feeding them food that's not high in these phytonutrients. And it's not the foods that they were, you know, that their ancestors ate. Come on, you know. You know, I have 2 grandchildren, and they come stay with us here last month, and their parents brought some food for them, and there was some crackers, and I counted 49 different ingredients on on that cracker box. And I'm going, that isn't food. That's a food-like substance, but it's not food. There's no way you can consider that food, right?
Yeah.
Impossible.
Yep. It's
Yep.
true. Um, we have so much relearning to do, repairing and revitalizing, restoring, relearning, regenerating.
Hmm.
So much good work to be done.
Yeah.
So
But
much.
but but the important thing is the snowball, I feel, is finally at the top of the hill and it's starting to roll down. And it's picking up momentum. I mean, there's so many organizations out there that are doing good work. I mean, for instance, I'll just throw one name out: the work that Dr. Jonathan Lundgren and the Dicas Foundation are doing on the Thousand Farms Initiative, largest biodiversity study ever undertaken. I mean, it's fantastic. We need things like this to show that, hey, we need to make a change. And then the other thing is, I remember I spent many a day talking to groups of 5 or 10. Well, now we're talking to groups of hundreds that are showing up to learn about the principles, rules, and processes. And that's a good thing. The interest is getting larger, the knowledge is expanding, the excitement's building. it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity to really make a difference.
Yeah, it's true. Well, thank you. We could talk all day. I don't want to take all of your time. You're an important busy man doing good work. Any last thoughts? Anything you want to tell our listeners that you have in your mind?
Well, I ended my book this way, and I always try and end, just make a difference. Each of us, maybe you can make a difference with that school teacher. Maybe you can make a difference by helping someone, start a garden this year, grow some of your own food. It teaches our children something very important, and you're making a difference. If all of us just try to do our part in making a difference, we'll drive big change.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Well, thank you, Gabe. It has been an absolute pleasure.
It's a real pleasure being with you, Daniel.
Thank you.